Hello, and welcome to UMass Dartmouth Magazine. I'm Randy Helm. I'm the Chancellor of UMass Dartmouth, which is a 9,000 student research university that's a powerful catalyst for economic, cultural, and social growth, both in the South Coast region and the Commonwealth. And I want to thank Dartmouth Community Television for making UMass Dartmouth Magazine possible. So we're here to share some of the interesting activities and ideas and the people that distinguish UMass Dartmouth and make the university such a valuable member of the community, of the Commonwealth, of the nation, and the world. Now, in just a few moments, we're going to be talking to the Dean of our law school, Eric Mitnick, who joins us in the studio today to discuss what makes UMass Law such an unusual place. And believe me, it is different from any law school that you will have heard of. But before we do that, we're going to take a look at a very interesting and somewhat experimental program that UMass Law has developed to deliver on the promise of equal justice for all. So let's watch that together.
Justice Bridge really lies at the heart of our mission as a law school. You know, our core commitment at UMass Law is to expand access to justice and to offer the highest quality legal education, and Justice Bridge really allows us to do that.
Justice Bridge began about 4 years ago as the brainchild of Debbie Ramirez, a good friend of mine, and she asked me to help build out the business model for this program. So we looked at all the existing programs at the time, and there were about 12, and we didn't really like what we saw. We wanted to do something different, something that served access to justice. So we started building relationships, talking to people, trying to meet some of the unmet needs in the legal community and fill in gaps that really weren't being met by other existing legal service providers. And ultimately, Mary Lou Bielik demonstrated the vision. The idea was proposed to her. She embraced it immediately, and so it began. And so we started with UMass, which has been just a wonderful partner for us. We officially launched in August of 2014, and we've been going great guns ever since.
So the mission at UMass is to expand access to justice. We're aware of the fact that 92% of the people who go into housing court and are facing eviction or facing foreclosure aren't able to afford a lawyer, and they have to represent themselves. And in family court, 86% of the people who are going into court and potentially facing custody issues with respect to their children aren't able to afford a lawyer. And so the mission at UMass Law, by keeping tuition affordable and by offering generous scholarships, especially in public interest areas, is to enable law graduates to represent that segment of society and expand access to justice in that way.
Well, the young attorneys, are very motivated. They're very they're very bright. But they need some guidance because of their lack of experience. So I, as a mentor, can fulfill that role and give them that kind of guidance.
For me, as a practicing lawyer, and now as someone that's getting older and more senior, as they say, to be able to work with young lawyers, to not only provide them the opportunity for legal education, but then to be able to do some hands-on talking through some of the stuff I'm doing, what are the learning points, what's the takeaway. That's really the fun part for me. It's fun doing the cases, it's interesting doing the cases, but to take away the learning stuff and then be able to share it with the next generation is just huge for those of us who have a ton of experience and are now reaching the sort of end point of our careers. To be able to come in and sit with people who were at the beginning of their careers is just the best, the best.
I joined the Justice Bridge program for many reasons, really. But I would say if I had to choose just one, it would be the opportunity to have a heavy caseload in a flow of clients coming in to see a diverse group of cases and really get a feel for what areas of law are out there and how I can practice in different areas, and at the same time transitioning my practice to what I ultimately see myself doing and develop my professional career at the same time.
You come to see people in various situations where, again, you're talking about some fundamental rights. There are legal rights, be it in the area of family law, housing, immigration law, which is one of my primary areas of practice. And I think when you walk them through and you get the results that they were hoping and expecting, I think the satisfaction in their face, and then you feeling good about guiding them through and holding their hand, I think it's words cannot describe. As a matter of fact, today I was in court on a particular matter that started out very contentious, but using my approach, which is let's work things out for the best interest of the child or the children, and then putting the resentment aside, just to be able to actually reach an agreement and present it to the court, get the thanks from the court for working this out, and my client and the opposing side. I think it's nothing but rewarding.
Since its founding in 2010, UMass Law students have contributed over 87,000 hours of service to the community, and the monetary value of that is close to $4.5 million.
Welcome back. That was pretty interesting, wasn't it? The Justice Bridge program is just one of many contributions our law school is making to the community and to society. And as I promised, now we're joined by the Dean of the Law School, Eric Mitnick. Welcome to UMass Dartmouth Magazine, Eric. Glad you're here. Let me start by learning a little bit more about you. So why did you go to law school in the first place, and how did you end up here at UMass Law?
Oh, well, in a sense, that's my favorite subject. I get to talk about myself.
That's a good thing.
Right, sure. Like I think a lot of people who become interested in the law, it was the initial spark really occurred in a civil liberties course in college as an undergraduate. And I was really just incredibly impressed with the extent to which law could serve as a means of social change. And in particular, I'm talking about the Supreme Court cases of the 20th century, like Brown versus Board of Ed, written in language that was just impassioned and meaningful and inspiring, followed up by the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, all the way through some of the liberty cases and the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act of the 1970s, those sorts of things. And then I had the good fortune to be able to teach a civil liberties course to undergraduates as well, and see the same sort of spark in the undergraduates and that I had experienced, which was just a wonderfully edifying sort of experience. I ended up at UMass Law very happily. I was in San Diego teaching for 14 years at a law school, very well entrenched. Had a tenured faculty position. My wife was an assistant dean at the University of San Diego Law School. My son was in high school when, in the fall of 2013, someone sent me this position description for the associate dean position at UMass Law. And given how entrenched we were in San Diego at the time, it certainly never would have occurred to me to leave. But I became incredibly excited as I learned more about the law school. I mean, this was at a time in legal education when tuition had become so incredibly high and students were suffering under debt loads. To see what was going on at UMass Law, where everything seemed to be going right, with a terrific brand, the UMass brand, a critical mission where the law school was explicitly focused on expanding access to justice, and a unique identity, the only public law school in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and a place where there was a real commitment to the affordability of legal education so that the students would be able to graduate and fulfill that mission. And so despite the fact that my son was in high school, that my wife had a very good job, we moved across the country and we haven't looked back. It's been really wonderful.
Well, it sounds like your philosophy of law is a very good fit with UMass Dartmouth, with UMass Law School, and in particular that it's about training lawyers who are committed to justice, not just to providing corporate law or real estate law, but justice, and justice not just in terms of sorting out the good guys from the bad guys, but access to people's rights. That seems to be a consistent theme here. And so the courts, and of course as we know from what's happening in our country today, the courts are playing an increasingly important role in that checks and balances system that the Founding Fathers created. What else should people know about the UMass Law School? Because you've said it is pretty unusual in its commitment to access to justice. It is the only public law school in Massachusetts. It's one of the most diverse law schools in New England. And in addition, it's unbelievably affordable compared to most law schools. So what else would you say? I mean, that's a lot. So what else would you say? What else would you say makes it distinctive and unusual?
Sure. I mean, in a number of ways. First of all, it's important to point out that we not only have the lowest tuition in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts by an enormous margin. We're probably half the cost of most of the private law schools. We also entered the most diverse class in all of New England last year. And diversity in legal education, diversity in education generally, I know you know as well, is really important. I can tell you, just in the 2 years that I've been at UMass Law, 2.5 years, but 2 years in the classroom, there were at least 2 instances in which the diversity in the classroom really changed the way that I taught the law. I'll give you two quick examples. I was teaching a case on misrepresentation, which is fraud in tort law. And I was teaching the case. It was a case that was based in Minnesota. And someone had bought a car in the 1960s claiming that there was air conditioning in the car. And of course, there was not air conditioning. And you get a lot of these cases involving cars. But I would always call on a student who was from the upper Midwest. And I would say to the student, tell us what would happen if you were to turn on the vent in March in Minnesota. And they said, of course, cold air would come rushing at you. And so the court had decided that this was something that was obviously discoverable, whether or not there would be air conditioning. And my whole point in this dialogue was to point out that it wouldn't be obviously discoverable. Right? Well, I had a student in the class who was probably 10 years my senior. And he had lived all around the country. And he said to me, Professor Mitnick, have you ever seen a car from the 1960s with air conditioning? And I said, I had to admit that I had not. And he said, well, if you had, you'd know the court was right. Because the air conditioning units in a car in the 1960s were not built into the dash in the way they are today. Instead, it's this giant honking refrigerator kind of thing underneath the dash. And so if the person was buying a car with air conditioning, they would have banged their knees on it. And so it was obviously discoverable. And so the fact that we had this person who had varied life experiences, who was older than the average student, who added diversity to the classroom, completely changed the way in which we understood that case. And it's the same with, I was teaching a case on defamation. And there was an African-American student in the class. And for 14 years, I'd been teaching the same way. Teaching in defamation, which is civil wrongs for civil damages for harm to reputation, libel and slander. And there's a narrow category of cases in which the courts have ruled that sometimes people can't recover for defamation because the only group among whom their reputation would be harmed is just too antisocial. right?
Okay.
And so the example that I would use is the idea that the example is Bob the criminal cooperated with the police, and it's false. So think about among what group that would harm Bob's reputation. It would harm Bob's reputation, we would typically say, with his fellow criminals. Now he's not going to be hired, right, to be the getaway driver in this sort of, in my vision of a 1950s cops and robbers movie. And this student raised her hand and she said, well, what if it were Ferguson, Missouri, right? What if in this particular community, it's not an antisocial group that doesn't trust the police, but it's actually the community more generally. And I had to admit that I had to change the way that I thought about law. So diversity in the classroom is really just an absolutely critical aspect, especially for legal education. And we have one of the most diverse law schools.
Well, it's a diverse country, it's a diverse society, and all of those perspectives matter. And so, if lawyers are going to be trained to be effective, they need to understand that. So bravo.
Yeah.
Let me go on to a recent triumph of UMass Law. That's something that you and I both participated in a couple of places in this country, and that is the securing of full accreditation by the American Bar Association for the law school. What does that mean for any law school, and what does it mean for UMass Law?
Sure, and it was a wonderful experience going down to Chicago and to New Orleans and securing this on behalf of the first public law school in the Commonwealth. It means a lot. As an initial matter, it means...
And most people may not even know what accreditation is, so maybe you could work in a little explanation of what that even means.
Sure, yeah. No, I mean, colleges and universities across the country receive accreditation when they meet certain quality standards. And you have, essentially, it's an inspection, like as if a food inspector was coming into a restaurant, but on a much broader scale with respect to a university. And so the American Bar Association, the ABA, is the entity that is delegated the authority by the Department of Education to accredit law schools. And the ABA has promulgated some 50-plus standards with multiple parts that a law school, in order to receive ABA accreditation, has to meet every aspect of every standard. And so these are basically quality standards. And they range from standards with respect to the curriculum of the law school, to the extent of the academic support that is provided, the quality of the faculty. And so ABA accreditation is an assurance, it's a quality assurance that a school meets all of these standards. And on a very practical level, ABA accreditation is necessary for a law school's graduates to be able to sit for the bar exam in any jurisdiction. So the graduates of UMass Law are able to go and practice law anywhere in the United States, take the bar exam anywhere in the United States.
Well, this was when earlier I said that UMass Law was a very unusual place, and I think you've done a good job of laying out what the components of that identity are, and how they connect. So the affordability is not just a good thing in and of itself, but it's also good in enabling lawyers who get their training at UMass Law to have a wider range of career options, because they haven't put themselves in a huge debt situation where they have to take on high-paying clients, high-paying jobs, and they can actually dedicate themselves to the sorts of issues where the need is, such as family court, such as domestic issues where people need representation. So that is a great option to have. But tell me about some of the clinics that the law school has, so that it trains people to be effective in those kinds of areas. Because it's one thing to just say, well, yeah, you can go do this. It's another to say, let me show you how it's done and why the need is there, and why this could be a very fulfilling and important form of practice for you.
Yeah. So the law school has several clinics. And these are really designed with two purposes in mind. One is to provide free legal services to people within the community, and the other, as you mentioned, is really to train the next generation of lawyers. And so we have several clinics. One is the Community Development Clinic. And this is essentially a business law clinic, a corporate law clinic for small nonprofits and for small corporations where they really can't afford to hire a lawyer to incorporate and get their business off the ground. And the fact that the law school is there to help them to launch businesses in the community then serves as an economic engine for the community moving forward. And the Community Development Clinic in particular is a nice example of how access to justice doesn't just involve litigating in court. This is corporate law, this is business law, and there isn't access to justice even in the context of business law. So the Community Development Clinic is one. We also have a criminal prosecution clinic, which is a wonderful clinic under the supervision of the first Assistant District Attorney in Bristol County, Bill McCullough, who was the person who was in charge of the Aaron Hernandez prosecution. So we had our students involved in that prosecution and learning criminal law, whether or not they want to practice on the district attorney side or the public defender's side. It's an incredible opportunity. They go into court and they argue motions. This is real world practice of law. We have an immigration litigation clinic.
That's got to be very important these days.
It is incredibly important these days, even just from the perspective of going out into the community and educating the community about the rights that people have. Mm-hmm. It's certainly a very active clinic at the moment, and it's a very popular clinic. And I think one of the absolutely strongest programs at the law school. People come out of that clinic and are able to go out into the world and practice immigration law right away. We also have a new clinic, a brand new clinic called the Human Rights at Home Clinic, which is unique in that most of the human rights clinics, when we think of human rights, we think of international human rights. And Professor Margaret Drew started the Human Rights at Home Clinic to remind us that there is a need to protect human rights right here in our community. And so it's focused on things like domestic violence, focusing on protecting the victims of domestic violence. It's also focused on helping transgender individuals with name changes. And it's an incredibly broad array of potential help. And then finally we have a tribal law clinic, the Mashpee Wampanoag Tribal Law Clinic, where our students will go in and do certain civil legal services for members of the tribe, but also be able to engage in actual advice with respect to tribal law itself, which is a really special sort of clinic. There are only probably a handful of those in the country. Yeah. So just a wonderful array of clinics and opportunities.
I told our audience that UMass Law is an unusual place. Everybody thinks they know what law school's like. They've seen movies, they've seen courtroom dramas. We're a different kind of law school, and one that I think we can all be very proud of here in the Commonwealth. Dean Mitnick, thank you. It's been great to have this conversation and to have a chance to share with people in our area just what's going on at UMass Law. It's kind of hard to believe that it was so difficult to convince the rest of the Commonwealth that this law school belonged here and that it was a great idea. But I think every day we're proving that it was a fabulous idea and doing good work. So keep it up.
Thank you. Thank you very much.